Hey everyone, this is Lauren Stein over here at Acctivate, and today we're going to discuss manufacturing with Acctivate and some of the options that you have to process those types of transactions. We're going to start with a broad overview of the manufacturing options and their differences, followed by a demo of creating and tracking demand for those items. To begin with, assemblies are made to stock items which are comprised of a list of components used to create a new item which sits in your inventory. The cost of the finished good is created by rolling up the cost of each component listed on the session. Once posted, the components themselves are removed from inventory and you'll have a newly built item sitting in your warehouse. The COGS account used on a sales invoice will be based on the finished good. This is due to the nature of the item being inventoried. Like it is an item itself after it's been posted instead of, multiple components. You have the option of utilizing standard, custom, and/or process assemblies. Custom and process assemblies do require the need for an extra module, but they allow the user to set components as variable, giving them the ability to modify the actual quantity used, as well as add or remove components on the fly while in the inventory assembly window. Process assemblies have an added functionality of allowing the user to specify a yield different than the standard assembly quantity. This means the components used are what's listed, but you can say you're building, let's say, 10 ounces of broth, but after the process is complete, you end up with only 9.5 ounce yield. The same number of components or raw ingredients are used for 10 versus 9.5 ounces, but you only want to have 9.5 ounces on hand when you post that assembly. So the process assemblies give you the ability to have different yields than what you were actually building, as well as take out the full number of components out of stock. On the other hand, kitting items are made to order, which are comprised of a list of components put together based on a sales order to send to your customer. You can think of these as packages or bundles of items. There's no work order involved, and the components can be seen on the pick and/or pack list with component reports printed from the order. The COGS accounts used on the sales invoice are based on each component rather than the kit itself. This is due to the nature of the kit being non-inventoried and the components being the inventoried items that you're selling your customer. Kitting is an add-on module with an additional module of custom kitting available. Standard kits have a set list of components, while custom kits allow the user to add or remove and even substitute components as needed, as well as setting the quantity used to being variable. And lastly, the other bill of material type we have are assortments. Assortments are similar to kits in that they are non-inventoried with a set list of components and are made to order. The difference is in the way you schedule what the customer ordered. For assortments, you have a generic item like red knit shirt with components comprised of each size of the red knit shirt available in your inventory. The person entering the order would enter the total number of shirts for the main assortment item on the sales order, followed by specifying which components are being ordered to fulfill that total ordered quantity. Acctivate will schedule the ordered components based on current availability, and like kits, the cost of goods sold accounts are based on the components since the assortment item is non-inventoried, comprised of those individual inventoried items. Like all other bill of material types, the assortment and each component are listed as their own item in Acctivate. Assortments don't negate the need to add each component in inventory. So what that means is you'll have an assortment, a kit, or a finished good assembly item, and then you'll also have each component as their own item in Acctivate as well. So let's compare assemblies and kits. Here's a breakout of the differences between the assemblies and kits. They're the most commonly used bill of materials and have major differences. I didn't list assortments here since they aren't as common. They are similar to kits, but there is a difference between the multi-level BOM. The assortment is just going to list the specific, the standard set of components on that sales order window. You're not going to see a breakout of, multi-level bill of material components. So make to stock and make to order is key here. An assembly is something created by combining components to make a completely new product which sits in your warehouse as an inventoried item. Kit items are non-inventoried since they are what some people would call a bundle of independent items put together strictly for a sale. They do not create their own unique product that sits on a shelf waiting for someone to purchase. So the assembly items, once you build it, it's going to be its own item in your inventory, and kits aren't put together until it's listed on a sales order. So that's a make to stock versus make to order. This is also the reason why assemblies can be lot or serialized, while kits can only be numbered when invoiced. Lot or serial numbers can sit on a shelf and be fully tracked and or traced, and kits won't have a lot or serial number created until you've actually, added all the components or put all the components together and invoice that order. So you can create a lot or serial number when you invoice it, but you can't just say, I'm going to use this lot or serial number because you never received a lot or serial number or created a new one like you would for an assembly. Single level bill of materials simply means that the work order only shows one level of the bill of material list or the component list. If you utilize nested assemblies, you're not going to see, when you add the top level assembly to an assembly session, you're not going to see each different level. You're only going to see the list of components for that top level. So if you do utilize nested assemblies and you wanted to post them all at the same time on one session, you would need to create or add multiple transactions to the single inventory session to build the full item. Or you also have the option to, create a session for each different step. That's definitely up to you. If you did want to use transactions for nested assemblies, keep in mind the first transaction needs to be the lowest level, and the second transaction would be the next level, and so forth. So when you post that session, all transactions are posted, but they're posted in the order of the transactions. So transaction 1 needs to be the lowest, transaction 2 is second, and so on. So if you don't have them in the right order and you don't have those nested assemblies already in stock, you're not going to be able to post the session until you do have enough quantity on hand to build the next level. So that's why you have to do it in the same order that you would to put the whole item together. So multi-level bill of materials are available for kits since you're building for a specific order. So a kit component can be another kit comprised of its own list of components, and you'll see the breakout of each level on the sales order kit components window. This takes us to the next major difference. Assemblies are processed via work orders, while the kits are processed via the pick tickets on the sales orders. So assemblies require the user to create an inventory session to post, and kits are built on the fly. So you think of that as like JIT inventory, just in time. And to build on a mobile device, the user would need to create and process an assembly session on the device, but would simply pick the necessary components via the mobile picking module for kits. And you have the option to either not show the components on the mobile picking, show the components but not be able to update them, or show the components and update them as needed. So one of the major questions that we get all the time is, how do you create demand for these different types of items? There are a couple of differences in how you create the demand for these bill of material types. So for assemblies, the finished demand is by adding the item to a sales order. So if you don't have enough already available in the warehouse, because like I said earlier, assemblies are inventoried items, you'll see it appear on the inventory management tab of business alerts. The raw materials or components of the assembly have demand once they've been added to an inventory assembly session. The inventory assembly session is where you can print work orders to send to the warehouse in order to build the items. Some customers I've worked with like to set up a different warehouse to separate finished goods and raw material inventory to not only utilize different inventory asset accounts, but also to make it easier to see the demand for one or the other. This gives the user more visibility when you're utilizing the inventory management tab of business alerts, because you can filter on a specific warehouse. So if you've added a finished good to a sales order and you didn't have enough availability, you could filter on the finished good warehouse and you can see what assembly sessions need to be built. And then once you've created those assembly sessions, the raw material warehouse will show any need to reorder those raw materials from your vendor. This is by no means required, but I do have a few customers doing this successfully when processing multiple assembly sessions. So you can use one warehouse if you're more comfortable with that, or you can break it out, and you don't necessarily have to assign a different inventory asset account to the warehouse, but if you wanted to see the value of the raw materials versus finished goods broken out, then you can definitely do so by creating parent-child relationships in your chart of accounts. Kit and assortment items have demands solely on the sales order itself. Acctivate will only schedule as many kits as are available based on the component availability. For example, if you've ordered 10 kits with only enough components to fully cover 2, Acctivate will automatically schedule 2 on the order, leaving the remaining 8 on back order. And it's not going to schedule the next one until you have enough components to fully cover that one kit. So you can't go through and pick and choose which ones can be scheduled based on the item availability until you have enough to schedule the full at least one kit. Assortments require the user to order the total number of items on the top level and also schedule each component within the matrix to fulfill the ordered quantity manually. So, the demand for each component on an assortment depends on whether or not that user has specified, if we're going to go back to that red knit shirt, what sizes have been ordered for that whole order of 10 shirts. So that way Acctivate knows what the demand is for, maybe medium, large, and small shirts. So like I said, I was just going to do a broad overview of, creating or the differences between assemblies and kits, because I really wanted to show you how to process these transactions, because I feel like that's really important for the manufacturing side in Acctivate. So let's go ahead and get into my demo. So today we're going to be working with every type of bill of material that I discussed: standard, custom, process assemblies, standard and custom kits, as well as assortments. So I've already created a little bit of a demo in here. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a sales order to show you how this is all going to flow. Okay, so lines 1 through 3 are assemblies, and you can see that I've got the warehouse set to a finished good warehouse. Lines 4 and 5 are kits. So we have enough components to fulfill the 2 ordered quantities for this kit, but we don't have enough to fulfill the full ordered quantity, so Acctivate scheduled the one that we do have enough to fulfill. And then line 6 is going to be an assortment. So let's take a look at what I was talking about with the inventory management tab on business alerts. So you can get to business alerts. Some people have it open automatically, which you can set in the user permissions, and some people would prefer to open it manually. You can do so by clicking this button on your icon bar or going to alerts, business alerts. So once you've got it open and you want to take a look at what needs to be reordered, or what's gone below your availability, as well as your min, max stock quantities, you go to your inventory management screen, and let's take a look at this deluxe binder set. So it's got 4 back ordered. So let's take a look at what component is back ordered. And it says CP2003. And as you can see, I've got this kit within a kit. So this is the top level kit, the deluxe binder set, and then we have this D5X, which is also another kit comprised of the insertable dividers. So let's go back to the CP2003, and we don't have enough to cover the full kit, so it's only scheduled 5, which that's the kit quantity of 5. So if we close this and we look at our inventory management tab, we can see, I'll scroll down a little bit, CP2003, because that demand has now been created for this item. Now you can see that the recommended quantity is 790, so let's touch on why that is 790. So it's going to be based on the following calculation. This is in Warehouse F. And you can see Warehouse F has a minimum stock quantity of 500 and a maximum stock quantity of 800. There are 1,110 on hand, but we have -20 available. So it's getting that 790 recommended quantity by the 1,110 on hand, plus the 30 on purchase order, minus this 860 scheduled, minus the 270 listed as back ordered, and that's 10. But the max stock quantity is 800, so Acctivate is going to recommend 790, and that's to fulfill all the other orders that you have, as well as the one that we have up here as the demonstration. So let's not worry about the kit components just yet. I wanted to get into the assembly side of this. So I'm going to go ahead and filter on the finished goods warehouse. I don't have any minimum or maximum stock quantities set for the items listed on the sales order in the finished good warehouses. So you can see that the recommended quantity is solely based on this sales order. For customers that are doing, a bunch of orders at a time and they need to build a whole bunch of assemblies, this recommended quantity is going to be probably a lot higher for them than it is for me here, because it's going to be based on the total availability. And so we can use this tab to track demand and create the necessary assembly sessions based on what's listed here. Now you can't create the inventory assembly session from this window. This is really just going to be used as a reference point. Also, you can see I've got a raw materials warehouse, and right now the only thing listed is table leg because I did set a min-max quantity on the raw material warehouse, because let's say I wanted to have, a certain amount of table legs because we build these tables at a pretty regular basis. So let's just see what those quantities are. So raw materials, the min stock quantity is 8, and then the max stock quantity is 32. So that's why it says 32, because we don't have any on hand or anything like that. So let's go back to the finished good warehouse, and we're going to create an assembly session based on what's listed here. So to do that, you go to inventory assemblies. And I'm going to create this all on one session just to show you how to add transactions to a session. So we'll hit new. And we're going to look up the products. I'm going to filter this based on finished good, because whenever you have it filtered on a specific warehouse and you select the item from this lookup, it automatically uses that warehouse for the assembly session. So let's start out with the executive work table. You can see, I have on hand of 5, but I have -2 available. And then you can see it defaulted to the finished good warehouse. I'm going to go ahead and build 5 because I want more on hand than just what's for this sales order. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and save this, and then we're going to add transactions. So what the transactions do, it goes back to, you can either do nested assemblies with transactions. So let's say this was a nested assembly, and this first transaction would be the lowest assembly that would need to be built to create the quantity on hand for the component on the next level. And also, if you wanted to post a bunch of sessions at once, say if you have multiple warehouses that you needed to build into, or you have, you want it all to be on the same day or something like that, and you wanted to build multiple items like what we're about to do now, you just hit this add transaction. You see it created transaction 2. The session number is 49, and that stayed the same. So when we post this, it's going to post every single transaction. So let's add the coffee French roast. Again, it defaults to finished good because that's what I had selected on the lookup window. And we're going to do a quantity of 12. And notice that this yield field is now available for this session due to this being a process assembly type. You also have the quantity breakout, so you have standard unit quantity, the unit quantity, and the actual quantity. The standard unit and quantity are based on the components tab of the item, but the actual quantity and unit quantity will fluctuate when the user overrides them to enter alternate values. And we'll come back to that here in a minute. So let's go ahead and add another transaction because we wanted to make enough to fulfill this full order. And the last one was this K10L. And I'm going to build 30 because this is another item that I want to have on stock. Now this one is a custom assembly, so the yield field is not available, but you do have the standard and actual quantities used for the custom assemblies. Okay, so let's go ahead and save, and we'll talk about the workflow status. So the workflow status here is going to print on the work order reports, and you can use this to say where they are in the process. It doesn't actually affect the assembly itself. So if I change the workflow status to complete and I save this, that doesn't post the inventory into your stock in your warehouse. That simply just says that this particular transaction has been completed. And so if you have multiple transactions, you can track the workflow status within each transaction and you can take a look. So we'll say this one's scheduled, and we'll save, and we'll go back to transaction 1, and it's only been entered, but we've already got this one actually in progress. So we're going to go ahead and put that to in progress. And you can do that on each transaction. And so let's also take a look at the work order report. So this is the work order report. It prints from the inventory assembly session window before you post it. The report that you see after you post it, or the report that you can print from the reports menu, is the actual inventory assembly register. So it's not going to show you the same information as this one does. So this is the full work order right here. You can see the workflow status below the transaction date and when it was opened, and it prints a page per transaction. So it separates that information, and it also gives information on the company address and the phone and fax and email. So I do have customers who order components like fabric to ship to another location, which they are responsible for that fabric value in their own inventory, and the vendor that uses this fabric is the one that cuts and sews them into textiles. So you can use this report to send to that vendor in order to tell them what to cut and sew. Since it prints page per transaction, it gives them the ability to easily see which products they need to build. Also, the assembly session can be used to post a landed cost at a later date. So let's say you do receive into this off-site warehouse the raw materials, and you create the inventory assembly sessions and you print the work orders and send it to that vendor, and the vendor does the processing, and once they let you know that those shirts are ready and they're being shipped to your inventory, you can post this inventory assembly session, and that gives you the ability to post a landed cost session later on down the road, so that vendor that's cutting and sewing or doing whatever they're doing to your items that you're responsible for, if they send you a bill later on, then you can create that vendor bill via landed costs and apply it across all the related assembly transactions and sessions. If you don't have landed cost and you have a set cost per item from the vendor that's doing this for you, you can also use a non-inventoried item and set a standard cost per each or per hour or whatever they're doing or however they're charging it to you. And then you can add that information as a component on the assembly itself, and that standard cost would be rolled up into the finished good. So later on down the road, or if you've already created a purchase order for that, let's say labor, then whenever you invoice it, the cost offset account used for that non-inventoried item on the assembly session will be reconciled into accounts payable. So now that we've looked at the work order report, let's close that, and we have created the demand for the components. So if we refresh this finished good, now you can see there's nothing here to be processed, and we can move on to raw materials. So now we have a list of raw materials that we didn't have earlier because, like I said, we've created this inventory assembly session. So now the demand for these components has been created. And also you can notice that the table leg is now 52 and it was 32. And that's because, we need these 20 because we're going to build 5. Okay, and so since these are actual components and it's not nested assemblies, then this tells us that we need to reorder this in order to fulfill these assembly sessions. So we click this reorder, and it shows you, here I'll pull this over a little bit, it shows you each product, the preferred supplier. So on these items, these vendors that are listed as a preferred supplier are checked as preferred. And then you also have supplier name. And this is going to be a list of vendors that you've purchased from in the past. Let's see if I have any that have multiple. Looks like none of them have multiple. But if you did have multiple vendors listed on that product and you didn't want to use the preferred supplier, you would select that supplier name. So if you check group by vendor, you can go through and you can reorder based on a vendor. And we do have a webinar that completely covers this reorder wizard. So we're not going to go into full detail here. But what you can do, you can check all, because I need to get all these ordered. And let's say this fabric, I don't want to just do the 40. I want to go ahead and order a little bit more because I use this fabric all the time. So let's change this to 50. And we'll save the selections, and you can see the PO totals, and you create the POs. And it prompts you, do you want to create these POs? Yes, I do. So we'll hit yes. They've been created. And now the raw material warehouse doesn't have anything on here because we have created the POs for those items. Because the on PO does affect this inventory management screen. So now if we go to purchasing management and we sort based on entered date, we see the 3 new POs that I've created from the reorder wizard. And I'm going to go ahead and just open one of these POs. You can do that by double clicking, or you can do view PO from the business alerts. And these are the table legs and the tabletop. And let's say this is the future and we have already received these items in stock from our vendor. So we go ahead and click receive. And it defaults to the raw material warehouse, which is what was listed on the PO, and it shows the full quantities and products based on the configuration management option that I have checked. And I'm going to show you a little trick here too. So you can use transactions to also receive multiple purchase orders, just like you can use transactions to build multiple assemblies. So let's add transaction, and I'm going to add 1258, and you hit tab, it opens up with the vendor information, the warehouse on the PO, and the item information listed on the PO. Hit save, add transaction, 1259. And again, I'm getting that from the PO number in the background here from business alerts. All right, and let's go ahead and post this into stock. And we'll look at the report. You can see the report breaks it out. The session itself was session 50, and then each transaction was for a different PO. So you see, the different PO numbers, the different transaction numbers, and what they were all comprised of, as well as a complete session total at the bottom. Now the process would be the same for ordering the components for kits, except for, you may not have a separate raw material warehouse for kits. I mean, you're more than welcome to. It would be the same process. You could do the reorder management. So if we wanted to order more of that CP 2003, we could do so, as well as order, any other product that we wanted to order just to have in stock based on our current demand. And that's recommended quantity column that you see over here on the right. So we're not going to reorder CP 2003. I'm going to go over some other aspects about custom kitting instead of doing that. Okay, so let's go back to this inventory assembly session, and we're going to go to the coffee French roast. And let's change the yield to be 10. And keep an eye on the actual quantities. When I tab out of here, the actual quantities do not change, because we're assuming that, the build quantity is 10, and even though your yield may be different, most likely you use the same quantities that you would have used for building 12. And that usually happens in like food processing, stuff like that. So maybe you had some scrap or something happened in the process, so you weren't able to make as much, let's say, soup or something like that. And so the yield would be different, but you still use, let's say, like 15 of the Colombian beans to make this, but maybe something happened and you lost some of them or something like that. Or some of them went bad, or, there's a myriad of reasons why that could change. So let's say we use 14 pounds instead of 15. And then you can see the unit quantity changes, because that is the unit quantity that we're using for the total assembly session. And the standard unit quantity is 1.25, but this unit quantity is now 1.4 since we're using 14 pounds instead of 15. And let's say that it took a little bit longer to make due to some issues in the warehouse. So the labor we use 0.8 hours instead of 0.6. And so that also changes the unit quantity to 0.08 from 0.05, which is the standard. And let's save these changes and go to the large shirt, edit. And we're going to say that the actual quantity for the fabric was 93, because let's say that there was a tear or something happened in the process, so we had to add a couple of yards to this specific assembly session, and doing so also made this one take a little bit longer. So we're going to add 3 hours, and then again the unit quantities also fluctuate based on what you've changed. Okay, so let's go ahead and post these transactions. And like I said, the workflow status doesn't actually affect it, but we can go ahead and say that this one was complete. We've already made all of our modifications, and we'll go back and we'll say this one has also been complete, as well as transaction 1. Let's add that lot number. There's 12 available and we only need 10, so that's good to go. If this was a standard assembly and you needed to go across multiple lot numbers, you can actually split the transaction to build as many as it would take to fulfill that one lot, and then you would create a new session to continue the build quantity to be, let's say we could build 4 of these with the available quantity of this lot number, and then we could split the transaction to build the remaining 1 with another lot number. So if you do come across that a lot, you may want to look into custom assemblies, just because with a custom assembly you could actually add TP205 to the list of components again, and then you can select the new lot number. So that would be something to keep in mind if you don't have that and you're also using lot numbers on assemblies. So now we can post it, and let's take a look at this register. So earlier when we printed the report, it was a work order. Well, now we have the inventory assembly register report. So this is going to show everything that we posted. It's going to break it out by transaction, and you can see the session number as well. And so for this top one, the assembly, we built 5 with a unit cost of $45.02 and the total amount of $225.10. And that's because we rolled up the cost of the components into this finished good. And so you're going to want to see the transaction total be 0, as well as if you're just posting one session, you're going to want to see the session total, the batch total, to be 0 as well, because the net result of an assembly is just an increase in one of your inventory asset accounts, as well as a decrease in another inventory asset account, or the same, either one. But the net result is going to be 0 because it's going to balance, because the cost of the components rolls up into the cost of the finished good. And also you see the GL accounts that were used for the finished good. So this is coming from the warehouses. So in a minute here I can show you how I've got these warehouses set up. But if we scroll down to transaction 2, this was the coffee French roast. And this is the one that we changed the yield. So you're going to see the planned quantity, the quantity variance, and the cost variance for the finished good. And you're also going to see that for anything that was changed within the session. So the planned quantity is going to be 15, but we actually used 14, so it's going to be at -1. And then this is your cost variance of that difference. And it shows that for each of the components. Now, if we go to the last page, this one's going to look a little different because one of our components was a FIFO cost method component. So we changed the component to be 93. So the report itself, it shows the quantity variance of 83 on the top, but that's because this top line is the first cost layer available. So you removed that cost layer from inventory and it only had a quantity of 7 in it, and the cost was 205. And then we have these 2 lines down here that are F90-R, and those are the remaining cost layers that were used. So it takes into account these different layer costs, and like I said, it rolls it up into the unit cost. And the reason why we're seeing cost for labor is because this labor is set to have a standard cost per warehouse, and it uses the D warehouse unit cost of 12. And the account used for standard costed items like labor or non-inventoried items is going to be set as the cost offset account on the warehouse. So again, we'll take a look at those warehouses here in a minute. Okay, so if we go back to alerts, we just verify that we're good to go. Finished goods, we have nothing. Raw materials, everything's been fulfilled. Okay. And if you're a company that is similar to the one I was talking about earlier, who utilizes another location for something like textile creation or something where you order your raw materials into their warehouse and they process it for you and then send it to you, this tab or this business alerts can also be a way for you to create those transfer sessions. So when it is off-site, you can, you could filter it based on that specific offsite warehouse and also the warehouse that you're actually ordering from. So the customer is ordering from warehouse D, but let's say warehouse F is offsite. And so that you can actually create the transfer session based on that information. So if we go to warehouse D and we know that like some of these are items that need to be transferred, we can right click on this grid, send to Excel and use that Excel spreadsheet to import an inventory transfer. That functionality is available from version 10.1. So that would be a great tool if you are doing those transfers on a regular basis. You can actually use this inventory management utility to build those transfers for you or assist in building those transfers. The recommended quantity may be different if you've got min max set, so you just would keep an eye on that, but it is an option. Okay, so let's go back to the sales order. So we've posted the assemblies into stock, so let's reset the schedule, and this will go through Acctivate your item list and it'll see what is currently available. So now you can see the top 3 lines are scheduled, but we still got this deluxe binder set with 4 on back order. So let's open this component tab and see what's going on here. So like I said earlier, we've got a multi-level bill of materials. This is the top level on the order, and then this is a kit within the kit. And we've got this CP 2003, but we didn't want to reorder it because we've actually got a product that we can use to substitute that. So this is based on the substitutions tab on this CP 2003 product. If you click the substitutions, we've got 2 available substitutions. Whichever one you highlight is the one that you would substitute it out with. So we'll substitute it. Kit quantity is 5, available is 300. We should be good. It's not going to refresh the back ordered quantity until you save and close this. We can also add to and delete products from this. So let's say we've got B85-1. We wanted to add this. So now it's got 2 levels of kits within it, and then we've got enough to fulfill that as well. So we can add that because this deluxe binder set is a custom kit, or we can add, delete, and substitute components based on, it being a custom kit. So let's delete it. I just wanted to show you how that worked. You can also revert if you wanted to revert the changes and set it back to what it was originally if you wanted to. So we'll hit save and we'll reset the schedule again. And so now this deluxe binder set is fully scheduled because we had enough quantity on hand of all the new components, this pad 45, to fulfill all 5. Now this line 6 is an assortment, and so you can see this one automatically back orders because you have to actually tell Acctivate which items within the assortment are needed to be scheduled or ordered. So typically you're going to do this when you're on the phone with a customer. It's not going to be done after the fact because you're going to be on the phone with the customer. They're going to be saying, hey, I need 10 red knit shirts, and you say, okay, can do. How many larges do you need? Well, I need 3 larges, 3 mediums, 2 smalls, and 2 extra larges. So you go ahead and add the ordered quantity for each one, and then Acctivate, as you're adding this, will check the availability for each of the components, and it'll schedule based on the availability. Now we have all of these sizes in stock, so everything is scheduled and there's nothing remaining, nothing left on back order. So we hit close, and now this order has been scheduled. And so when we save and we create an invoice, the cost of goods sold used for each component is going to differ depending on what bill of material type. So 1, 2, and 3 is going to use the cost of goods sold account assigned to the top level finished good. Lines 4 and 5 are kits, and those are going to use the cost of goods sold accounts assigned to each component, as well as line 6 is going to use the cost of goods sold account linked to each component itself. I don't have a bunch of different cost of goods sold accounts set up, so if I create this invoice, it's just going to be the same cost of goods sold account across the board. But if you did have multiple sales and cost of goods sold accounts, let's say assigned a product class, and each product has its own product class with its own cost of goods sold account, that's where you would see the difference. So after you sync, when you run the inventory detailed journal report, it's going to show you the different cost of goods sold accounts used for each of these items. So let's take a quick look at the warehouse setup that I have. So I've got this finished good warehouse, and you can see I've got an inventory asset finished goods, and then I've got the raw material warehouse where it has a inventory asset with raw materials as the child. And I did create an in-transit as well, but also the cost offset accounts is on this non-inventoried side of the warehouse, and you can assign one based on non-inventoried item type, labor, other charge, or shipping. So I've got this labor cost offset account of printing and reproduction. So those assembly sessions that had labor listed are going to hit this printing and reproduction account during the roll-up of cost when you post the inventory assembly session. So the ones that had labor included are going to be on the credit side, are going to be a mix of the printing and reproduction and the inventory asset raw materials account. And the debit side is going to be the inventory asset finished goods. So that way, at the end, you just have this value sitting in this finished good account. So when you look at your chart of accounts, you can actually see the breakout of that value on your balance sheet, which would be a great tool if you wanted to see that kind of breakout. It's not, again, none of that is required. You don't have to separate your accounts. You can still do multiple warehouses and just have them use the same account. Just like my Dallas and Fort Worth warehouse, their accounts are exactly the same, as well as the special order warehouses that I have set up in my demo. The only ones that are different are finished good, in transit, and raw material. So anything posted in this Dallas and Fort Worth warehouses are all going to go into the same general ledger account. But the finished good and raw materials and in transit give you that breakout. We had a question on where else is this workflow status shown other than on that printout. As a standard, it's only going to show on the assembly window and the assembly work order printouts. If you needed to, you could customize a report or talk to us about customizing a report to show you, maybe view all assemblies based on workflow status or grouped on workflow status. But again, you just contact us about that. And then also we have the change assembly workflow status if you wanted to do that. So we have this workflow status. You can select in progress, you can enter in a session number and hit tab, and then you can change the workflow status, and that would be one by one. So we have a question about the multi-PO receipt transaction process, if that works for not kitted items or non-kitted items as well. You can use these inventory assemblies, or any of these inventory transactions can have separate actual transactions. So when you hit new, it creates a session, and within that session you can add multiple transactions. So when you post that section, it will post every transaction listed in that section. So if you wanted to do like this mass receipt across a bunch of POs, you can do that based on you can create a transaction for each new purchase order, because you can't mix purchase orders on a specific transaction, but you can add transactions to receive across multiple purchase orders. I know that can kind of be confusing, so that's why I wanted to show it during the demo. So we had, each purchase order, which I don't know which ones are still open. Let's see. So we've got 1256, the warehouse is F, and it's for Martin office. And if we hit save, add transaction. So now we've got this purchase order 1231 for communication systems for a different product, same warehouse, but the different transactions do give you the ability to have a different warehouse on each transaction. So when you post this, it gives you the ability to not only post over multiple purchase orders, but also multiple warehouses. Okay, so we've got a question on we've got somebody looking into moving to custom assemblies from standard, and how can you see a list of sessions to manage what you already have? Something similar to the open order list. Now we do have inventory transaction reports that show you the assembly sessions, and you can add report selection criteria here, and I know for sure you can add whether or not it's been posted, so you can see open sessions versus closed sessions, which are going to be posted. I believe you can add what the actual workflow status is. So if we go to configuration manager, I'll just do this real quick and add the posted. It's going to be inventory transactions, inventory assembly, and we go to selection prompts on the right hand side, and we say posted or open or close or whatever you want to do. And it's INV register posted to INV, which is posted to inventory. And you hit save. And so if you put posted in as 1, that means it has been posted. Posted as 0 means it has not been posted. So inventory assembly. Now you can see we have this posted, and we set that to equal to 1. Preview. And these are posted sessions, which is session 35 and 49, which is what I just did. And I don't know if I have any actual open assembly sessions. I don't. So let me just add one real quick so you can see what the difference in the report is. So we're going to hit save because this one's going to be open. And any open sessions that haven't been posted are going to be in this drop down right here. If it's not in the drop down, that means it was either deleted or posted into inventory. So keep that in mind. So now we've got the session 52, and we can either hit this refresh or we can close it and run it again. If we have posted equal to 1, I would not expect to see session 52. And as you can see, it ends on session 49. So if we change this to 0, hit preview, it's only going to show session 52. So that can be a kind of workaround to show you the information you want. So you can see open versus closed sessions, and it can kind of give you the ability to manage that information in Acctivate through reports. Do you have tutorials on the alerts demand for standard items? We do have a webinar specifically on business alerts. So let me open up our help page. So if you go to help.acctivate.com, hover over Learn Acctivate and click Webinars. This is all of our posted webinars, and we have, let's see, when was it? Business alerts in the 2014 archive. So you click on business alerts. This goes over the full functionality of business alerts. It goes through reminders all the way to inventory management, and it does touch on that web store tab. So on this business alerts, each tab has its own function, and we go over everything that has to do with that during that webinar in business alerts. Is there a way to have an open balance on inventory assemblies? Are you asking if the assembly session will show you an open balance? Maybe. I can show you that each component line does show you that information. If you click in the warehouse dropdown, you can see the on-hand and available quantities for each warehouse, and that'll update based on what your current availability is. So if you have multiple warehouses or you're tracking multiple warehouses for this, and even if you stock your raw materials in multiple warehouses, you can see that information here in this dropdown. Are there best practices for month-end closing period? Although that doesn't really fall into what we're talking about today, we do have a really good webinar on 4 steps to prepare for year end. I know you're talking about closing periods, but this 4 steps to prepare for year end could give you some good information on kind of how to track that, how to find any possible differences or anything you need to reconcile maybe before you close your books. That would be a good place to start. And if you have any specific questions, definitely contact our support team and we can talk to you about options and what other customers are doing to process that. Okay, it looks like that's all for our questions. I hope that you got some good information out of that. Just like I was talking about a minute ago, we just saw our help site. We are constantly working on adding content. Like I said, we do post these webinars as recorded YouTube videos on our help site under the Learn Acctivate. It's the webinars menu. So feel free to take a look at not only this webinar once it's posted, but also other webinars that we've done in the past. I hope you got a lot of good information out of this. If you have any questions specifically about your setup, feel free to submit a support request and we can talk to you about some options that are available. I hope you have a great day and an awesome 4th of July holiday.